If the Jets offense is going to have success and avoid failure in 2025, four critical people need to step up. We'll talk about who they are today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, May 29th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, our focus is on the offensive side of the ball. As you probably know, the New York Jets have missed the playoffs 14 straight years. It's the longest drought in the NFL. And there are lots of reasons for that. But at the top of the list is over the last 14 years, the Jets offense has been mostly terrible. And if that's going to change, the Jets need to turn the offense around. We're going to talk about what it's going to take for this Jets team to have a good offense in 2025. We're going to talk about how, of course, you need role players. But ultimately, the success or failure is going to be driven by four people, one of whom's a coach, three of whom who are players. Now, when you look at the personnel for the Jets offense, there are a couple of things that stand out. I think, and this is good to say, the offensive line for once actually looks pretty solid. This time of year, we're usually trying to talk ourselves into a Jets offensive line. We're saying, well, if that guard, steps up this year, maybe we can make it work. Maybe if this young guy surprises us, the offensive line can be functional. No, right now, this is a solid-looking Jets offensive line on paper. You've got three former first-round picks in Olu Fashanu, Elijah Vera-Tucker, and the most recent first-round pick, Armand Membu. You have a recent second-round pick in Joe Tippmann, and you have a fifth player, John Simpson, who did a very solid job at left guard last season. And these guys are all under 30. In fact, 4 of the 5 guys are on their rookie contracts. So, this offensive line is actually looking pretty good. The big question marks with the Jets are at the skill positions, particularly the wide receiver position and the quarterback position. If we're being honest, Justin Fields is a guy still establishing himself in the league. He's a guy who's been an inconsistent thrower of the football, but one of the most talented runners of the football in the NFL. So I think all of this is adding up to make the Jets a team that's going to need to run the ball effectively in 2025. And I looked up the numbers. I think the Jets, for this offense to be successful to the extent the Jets needed to be successful, Jets are probably going to need to run for like at least 2,600 yards this year. And a lot of that may come from Justin Fields. That 2,600 yards was what a top 3 rushing attack provided last year. And that's what the Jets are going to need to do because Fields is still a work in progress throwing the ball. Now, Fields is going to have to get better than he's been in Pittsburgh and Chicago, but he's not a guy who's a terribly refined passer. He's not a terrible passer, but he's a guy who's still learning the ropes when it comes to throwing the football. As a runner, though, he's one of the few quarterbacks who you can say can be an impact runner. And by impact runner, I mean a guy who's a threat to rip off a 15 to 20-yard gain on a designed run. I mean, there aren't a lot of those guys in the NFL. I think Lamar Jackson's one, Jalen Hurts is another, Josh Allen's another. There are quarterbacks who are mobile. Like I think Joe Burrow is pretty mobile, but Joe Burrow is mobile from the standpoint he can evade pressure. He can move left or right. Justin Fields is on another level. Justin Fields is the type of guy who can be an impact runner. So, if you think about how do you get to 2,600 yards? Well, let's say Breece Hall runs for 12 or 1,300 yards. That's going to be important. Maybe Justin Fields adds 800, which leaves about 500 to 600 yards for the guys behind them. Your number 2, number 3 running back combined. It can maybe get you this to 600 yards. That's what the Jets are going to need. And a little bit later on the show, we're going to talk about how this offense is going to have to be designed. But I think you also have to consider the hierarchy in the offense. And one of the ways I like to look at it is I like to stack the skill players and say, who's our go-to guy and who's our number 2 option, who's our number 3 option. Usually when you hear talk in this context, it's about the receiver positions, like who's our number 1 receiver, number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver. But I think when you're judging a whole offense, you kind of just have to say, who is the guy this offense runs through? Who's the second option? Who's the second guy? Who's the third guy? Because sometimes your second guy could be a tight end. It could be a running back. And I think for this Jets team, you're going to have a very unique hierarchy. Now, I think the offense is ultimately going to be run through Garrett Wilson. Now, I know what you're going to say. I know you have a very good rebuttal to me. You might just say, John, weren't we just talking about how the Jets need to be a run-oriented team, that the Jets are going to have to run for at least 2,600 yards? And the answer to that is yes. But, of course, they're still going to need to throw the ball effectively. When I say the Jets are going to be run-oriented, that's a relative phrase. That doesn't mean like we're going out there running the wishbone. We're still going to throw the ball. And Garrett Wilson is going to see an overwhelming number of the targets, in part because of his ability. This is a guy who has played in horrible offenses for 3 years and still produced 1,000 yards every single season, but also because there aren't really any other good wide receivers on this team, which means he's going to need to get an inordinate target share. And the offensive coordinator, Tanner Angstrand, is going to have to figure out ways to get creative with Garrett Wilson. We'll talk about that in a bit. So, the Jets may need to be more run-focused than most teams in the league, but they're still going to need to throw the ball effectively, and Garrett Wilson's going to see an outsized number of those targets. So the way I describe it is, what's bigger, 80% of an orange or 30% of a grapefruit. The grapefruit may be the run game for the Jets. It's bigger than the orange, but Garrett Wilson's going to get a bigger share of that than any individual rusher will get in the run game. Garrett Wilson will get a bigger share of the passing targets than any individual rusher will get in the run game. So I think Garrett Wilson's like the top guy. The number 2 guy is Breece Hall. And the Jets need Breece Hall to be more like the 2022, 2023 version of himself than the 2024 version. Because 2024, Breece Hall actually was pretty good the last 3 quarters of the season, but there was one area where Breece Hall was really lacking, and that was in big play ability. Breece went from 14 plays from scrimmage in 2023 that gained at least 20 yards, down to 8 in 2024. So we went from 14 big plays to 8 big plays. That's not going to cut it. 14 big plays means you're producing a 20-yard gain almost every week, just short of every week, 14 out of 17 games. When you're only producing 8, that means you're doing it like less than once every other week. This is Jets offense, again, that's going to be very limited in its ability to make big plays in the passing game. So through the conventional passing game. So that means like the running back needs to step up. And that's where Breece, that's why the Jets drafted Breece. And in 2022 and 2023, he was a big play threat. He was a home run threat every time he touched the ball. I don't know exactly why it was in 2024. I'm still trying to figure it out. Like I keep going back to the film, and I am fool. I have no idea. I can't figure it out, but I hope that it comes back in 2025. So he's like your second option. But I think a good offense needs like 3 quality threats. And for the Jets, the third threat could be a little unconventional. And it goes back to what I was discussing a little bit earlier with Justin Fields, how he's such a talented runner. And I think the Jets will need to build in designed runs for him because those are potential big plays. In a way, designed runs are not a potential big play for almost any other team. And you could probably count the teams on one hand where a designed run for a quarterback is a potential big play. For most teams, when you design a run for a quarterback, it's just the type of thing to keep a defense honest. It's the type of thing you keep it in the back of the defense's head that, okay, the quarterback could pull the ball and run it. Maybe I can't over pursue the running back in case the fake handoff and the quarterback tucks it and runs it. With Justin Fields, he's a guy with a lot of speed, and he's also big. He can absorb a hit and he can dish out punishment as a runner. And in lieu of any other quality options at the skill positions, like Justin Fields as a runner, again, I think he's going to have to be a guy who gets at least 800 yards on the ground. And that's something he's capable of doing if he plays the full 17 games. And the Jets really incorporate the quarterback run into their playbook. And that brings me to the fourth person who's important. Notice I didn't say 4 players because I think there are 3 critical players for the Jets on offense. I just named them: Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and Justin Fields, all of whom really need to step up. I think with Garrett, as long as he's healthy, Garrett Wilson's good for 1,000 yards. Breece Hall coming off a bit of a disappointing season. Justin Fields trying to find his way in the league. But there's a 4th person who's critical for this offense. And it's probably not a surprising name. It's offensive coordinator Tanner Angstrand. Tanner Angstrand is going to have to work around a lack of talent to some degree on offense. And that's the ultimate test for a coach. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about some of the ways Tanner Angstrand is going to have to show that he knows how to manufacture offense, because there are specific things he can do to work around the talent gap. We'll discuss what they are as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I know in New York, a lot of you Jets fans also root for the New York Knicks, and I know, not exactly the dream Eastern Conference Finals happening for the Knicks, but there's still NBA action happening, and you can look forward to the NFL season. Jets 5.5 wins with FanDuel's over-unders. You think they're going to beat that? FanDuel's the place to go to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We're talking about the 2025 Jets offense. If you're a Jets fan, you have not seen many good offenses in recent years. And it's something that has to change. This team has struggled a lot, and many of the struggles have been based on the performance or lack of performance on the offensive side of the football. In our first segment, we discussed three critical players on offense: Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and Justin Fields. And in many ways, as these guys go, so will go the offense. But I think the same goes for a fourth critical person. Again, I didn't say four critical players. I said four critical people. The fourth critical person is Tanner Angstrand, the new offensive coordinator who came to the Jets from the Detroit Lions. He followed Aaron Glenn. Glenn was the defensive coordinator in Detroit last year. Angstrand was the passing game coordinator working under Ben Johnson. For the first time in the NFL, now he's been an offensive coordinator at some of the lower levels of professional football, but for the first time in the NFL, Tanner Angstrand is going to be an offensive coordinator. And it's going to be interesting to see what sort of offense he builds. And if we're being honest, Angstrand's going to have to work around some limitations because at the wide receiver position, the Jets are really struggling behind Garrett Wilson. And at the quarterback position, he's trying to develop Justin Fields. Now, Angstrand, you would presume, and with the Jets, I mean, I know you run into danger of thinking that there's always logic to what they do, but new regime, we can be hopeful. You would think that a big driving force behind the Jets' pursuit of Justin Fields this offseason was that the offensive coordinator saw a quarterback he thought he could work with. The offensive coordinator saw a quarterback whose skill set he could help develop. And the offensive coordinator saw a quarterback he could design a playbook for. Because I think the playbook that that will optimize Justin Fields is different from your normal playbook. And it's certainly different from the playbook the Detroit Lions ran last year with Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a pure pocket passer. I mean, there's not much mobility with Goff. He's got a great arm. If you put him in the right situation, as we've seen, if you put him in the right situation, he'll have success. You put him in the not right situation, you put him in the wrong situation, he's going to be limited. I think there's similarities to Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields has not reached the highs of Jared Goff just yet, but I do think like there's a possibility Justin Fields can succeed in the right situation. And part of that requires Tanner Angstrand to build the right offense around him. And again, this is a Jets offense that's going to have to like take principles from what the Baltimore Ravens do with Lamar Jackson, because I think this is going to have to be a relatively run-heavy offense. And look, I don't know the Jets have the personnel Baltimore has. Justin Fields is not Lamar Jackson. I love Breece Hall, but he's not Derrick Henry, at least at this point. But there are principles you can build in. And I think that Fields' ability as a runner adds exciting things to the playbook, because suddenly you have to block one less guy on the line of scrimmage, because there's always a guy you can option off of. There's a guy you leave unblocked. Fields sticks the ball out, and if that guy stays at home, he hands the ball to Breece Hall. If that guy looks like he's going to run at Breece Hall, Fields pulls the ball and runs the ball. And this can work like even in plays that are purely designed handoffs. Just the threat of Fields like pulling the ball and running can like freeze a defender. So Fields' ability can really enhance this run game. And the question is like, how many different run concepts can the Jets throw at a team in a given week? How creative can Tanner Angstrand get designing this run game, because there are all sorts of different like blocking assignments, different guys pulling, and you can kind of like make a defense's head spin with the run plays if you come up with a diverse enough playbook. It's not something we talk about a lot. Normally, the run game is pretty simple. Normally, teams run the same like eight or so run plays. Because they don't really have the ability of Justin Fields at the quarterback position as a runner. You can add all sorts of different run plays, including plays with a passing option element to them. So that's something that's going to be very important. Tanner Angstrand leaning into those designed quarterback runs, but also the way Angstrand constructs his passing game is important. He comes from Detroit. Ben Johnson, the guy he worked for last year, designed one of the best passing games in the league. Designed a lot of easy completions for Jared Goff. Now, part of it was Detroit had such a good offensive line that a lot of quarterbacks would look good in that system, but the passing game was very well designed. And it's going to be critical to develop route combinations that get Fields' first read open. Again, with Fields, you have a guy he's okay as a passer, but he's still developing. And you want to give him as many easy completions as possible. And part of that means, working in designs. The great offensive coordinators in this league, the great play callers, sometimes the play callers are head coach, the great play callers in this league design easy completions for their quarterbacks. Andy Reid does it. Kyle Shanahan does it. A guy who I think is a really good offensive coach is Mike McDaniel, the head coach of the Dolphins. I don't know if he's much of a head coach, but I think he's a very good play designer. And whenever the Jets play the Dolphins, it always amazes me how many easy plays he gives to Tagovailoa to execute. And even when his backup quarterbacks are in there, the offense can struggle. The old saying, what's the old saying? It's tough to draw blood from a stone. At some point, talent takes over. But there are always a handful of easy plays for a backup quarterback to execute, where the Dolphins get 8 yards on a first down because you just bring a receiver in motion who's wide open and the quarterback just tosses him the ball. Those are the types of plays that the Jets need to build in, because Jets don't have a lot of guys who can win one-on-ones on the outside in the passing game. One of the I remember when Adam Gase came to the Jets, and after Adam Gase, after 1 week, Sam Darnold got mono. And then Trevor Siemian, who was the backup quarterback, got injured. So the Jets had to start Luke Falk for a couple of games, who was not an NFL caliber quarterback. And the Jets offense put up historically terrible numbers. And people go, well, what did you want Gase to do? And the answer was not, I didn't need Adam Gase to put up 50 points with Luke Falk, but I needed him to actually design plays that could be executed, because a good offensive coach should be able to manufacture a handful of productive plays every game just based on design. With Adam Gase, if you give the ball to Peyton Manning and he's throwing to Eric Decker and the late Demaryius Thomas and Julius Thomas and Wes Welker, of course, Adam Gase in Denver, when he was the offensive coordinator there, is going to look really good, because Adam Gase didn't need to do anything. He didn't need to design anything for those guys to have success. A coach needs to be able to design a handful of plays a game that anybody could execute. And that's going to be important for Tanner Angstrand. And I think another key component for Tanner Angstrand is looking at this receiving group. Garrett Wilson is going to be the guy that draws most of the coverage. So the Jets have to be creative. And I know easier said than done. Jets need to be creative with how they use Garrett Wilson. They need to figure out ways to get Garrett Wilson free. And that's, some of that's using formations properly, stacking two receivers, Garrett Wilson being behind the guy on the line of scrimmage, give him a free release. I think Garrett Wilson should see a lot of time in the slot going forward, because it's tougher to jam a slot receiver. We know that when Garrett struggles, it's usually against a bigger physical press corner who can, knock him off his balance at the line of scrimmage. Well, if Garrett's playing the slot, he's further back from the line of scrimmage, and he also has the entire field to work with. You can't pin him to the sideline the way a great press corner can do to you on the outside. So you can create opportunities for Garrett that way, and sometimes line him up in the backfield. An aspect of Garrett Wilson's game that I don't think the Jets have utilized enough is his ability with the ball in his hands. He's a guy who just so effortlessly changes direction, and it's really tough to bring him down. He's really good at making guys miss in the open field because of his change of direction ability. So manufacture more touches for Garrett in space. These are the things that Tanner Angstrand needs to do. Look, you have to be realistic with where the Jets are personnel-wise on offense. I don't think you can expect Tanner Angstrand to come in and this immediately be the highest scoring team in the league. I don't think you can have him come in and expect it to be a top 5 offense in efficiency. But there are enough decent pieces here where this should be a functional offense. And that's going to be a big test of Tanner Angstrand. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we've talked about the key people. And look, I think these 4 people are going to be the ones who drive the offense: Wilson, Hall, Fields, Angstrand. But that's not purely enough. You are going to need some role players. You are going to need some supporting parts to step up as well. We'll talk about who those guys could be and the opportunities they could create for the offense as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We are talking about the New York Jets 2025 offense. Hopefully, we see a functional offense this year. It has been far too infrequent, if you're a Jets fan, watching an offense that can actually move the ball and put up points with any degree of consistency. Today, we're talking about how the Jets are going to get there. And any offense is really driven by its top few players, particularly at the skill positions, and of course on the offensive line. But I actually am entering the season with confidence in the Jets' offensive line. I think the question marks are more at the skill spots, as long as everybody stays healthy up front. And your top guys really are the guys who make the difference. So Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Justin Fields, and the offensive coordinator putting them in good spots, making sure that the Jets run a system that exploits their talents. That's all critical. But you also need some role players. You need some guys who can step up, maybe guys who aren't going to drive the car, so to speak, but guys who can contribute here and there. It's not really clear who those are going to be for the New York Jets. It's tough to envision it coming at the wide receiver position because at this point, it seems like, the number two receivers are going to be either Josh Reynolds or Alan Lazard, two veterans who really don't bring much to the table. Josh Reynolds has had a couple of okay seasons. Lazard years ago in Green Bay, put up a couple functional seasons, but these are not guys I think you want to depend on as a number two receiver at this point in time. And then you have like the three young guys. You have Xavier Gipson, you have Malachi Corley, who haven't really shown much to date, and then Arian Smith, a fourth-round rookie. It'd be nice if one of them stepped up. I think that the big-time role players on offense are going to have to come from the tight end position and the running back position. I've talked about Mason Taylor, the tight end the Jets drafted out of the second round on other recent shows. I think that with a player like this, it's always best to set your expectations low, and then if he outperforms them, it's a pleasant surprise than it is to go in expecting big things from him, because Mason Taylor is like the type of player who would be best served entering in the NFL as team second tight end as a rookie, maybe the third tight end, a guy who sees a handful of snaps, runs a handful of routes, maybe chips in here or there, but really is focused developing on the practice field, refining his route running. Because, I didn't really get the impression he ran that diverse of a route tree in college. There's going to be a lot that he's going to have to learn. I think he also has to get more consistent with his blocking technique. But there's a reason Mason Taylor went in the second round. As a player with some degree of upside, a player who has very good movement skills for a guy of his size. In fact, most big guys, it takes them a while to get moving. And for that reason, they don't really have great change of direction ability as route runners or with the ball in their hands. Taylor is actually pretty slippery in that regard. He's got an ability to break left or break right pretty effortlessly without losing much speed. So he could be a guy who's a useful outlet in the short passing game. And the Jets aren't going to run the passing game through him. The expectation certainly not that he's going to get like 1,000 yards like Garrett Wilson. The expectation, I'm not even sure it's as high that he's going to have as many catches as Breece Hall out of the backfield. But if he could chip in and be a third option, a fourth option in the passing game, that would be helpful. But I think more than anything, the Jets will look for these contributions from role players from their backfield. And Aaron Glenn has kind of talked about how much the Jets like the backs that they have, not just Breece Hall, but the two backs entering their second year, Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, both of whom showed flashes as rookies. Allen's flashes were early. Davis's flashes were late. Allen got off to a really good start. In fact, first month of the season, he was outperforming Breece Hall. Among other people, I was calling for Allen to see more carries, and then things kind of fell off for him. Davis was really an afterthought, wasn't really seeing much action at all. In fact, was inactive for some early games. Then late in the season, took on a bigger role and had some success. And, going back to what we talked about in the last segment, Tanner Angstrand getting creative. Well, if you're a team that doesn't have much talent at wide receiver, but you're happy with your backfield, you should work in some packages where you get multiple backs on the field at the same time. We saw that last year. The Jets, especially, week 2 against Tennessee, had some success in packages where Breece Hall and Braylon Allen were on the field together. Both of them have the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. And, teams struggle against the defense has struggled against running backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield. So, even in the passing game, maybe you can utilize their pass catching skills there. And, if we're building an offense where the run game is going to be a little deceptive, because I think like part of the success the Jets will have in the run game is the other team not going to know who's going to rush the ball. It could be Justin Fields or it could be Breece Hall. But if we put Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis on the field at the same time, suddenly there are 3 run threats. And you could, and this goes back to what Tanner Angstrand needs to cook up. Maybe you fake a handoff to Hall on the inside, then Fields breaks outside with Allen with the option to pitch it to him. Those are the types of plays you can build in. Again, the part of the focus has to be on the offensive coordinator building an offense that can manufacture successful plays. And Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis are going to have an important role because, again, like my magic number for this Jets offense is 2,600 yards because that would, based on what happened last year in the NFL, that would put them as a top 3 rushing attack. And look, again, the Jets are going to need to throw the ball effectively. When I say this, I am not saying that the Jets can be, a pure run team. What I'm saying is that relative to the other teams in the league, the Jets are going to have to lean into their run game more than your typical team. And Breece Hall and Justin Fields combined probably are not going to get 2,600 yards. A portion of that's going to have to come from Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. And part of this will come in when, Breece Hall needs a break. Aaron Glenn suggested, especially early in the season, you're going to see some degree of timeshare. And I think part of that will be to kind of keep Breece Hall fresh, make sure you don't run Breece Hall into the ground in September. But also, you can put these packages in, and maybe you make it easier to run the ball because if the defense doesn't know who's gonna take the ball, if Fields has the ability to pull it back and tuck it, if it could go to either Hall or Allen, just become a more difficult team to defend. So, these players are not going to be like the guys who ultimately determine whether the offense is a success or a failure if everybody stays healthy. These are more backup players. But I think in any offense, you're ultimately driven by your star players. You're driven by your high-level players. You're the top guys in your hierarchy. And, Garrett Wilson is a legitimate go-to guy in this league. One of the ways I look at it, I ask myself, is the number one option in this offense somebody who could be the number one option on the team that wins the Super Bowl? The answer for Garrett Wilson, I think, is yes. I think you can absolutely win a Super Bowl with Garrett Wilson as your number one option. Can you win a Super Bowl when Breece Hall is the second option in your offense? I think it's possible. If it's the 2022-2023 version of Breece Hall, absolutely. Now, I'm not suggesting the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl next year. Of course, that's probably not going to happen because there are other deficiencies across the roster. But you're starting off with 2 good pieces. And ultimately, a lot of it's going to come down to Fields' ability to develop, to show improvement. A lot of it's going to come down to Angstrand's ability to make these guys produce, put these guys in good situations. But you also need depth. You need guys who are going to be able to contribute because you can't rely on your top guys for every single thing. So even if it's marginal, Mason Taylor, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis are going to need to step up and produce for this team and hopefully develop into quality role players. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.